Most people watching Goodfellas think they are watching a true story. Ray Liotta's voice telling you he always wanted to be a gangster. Joe Pesci making you laugh right before he makes you flinch. Robert De Niro tipping everyone like a prince. Scorsese himself has called the film 90% accurate, and Henry Hill once said the same thing about his own life. But the version of Henry Hill the world fell in love with in 1990 was a polished, softened, Hollywood-friendly version of a man who was nothing like that in real life. The charming party boy on screen hid a drug addict who beat his own family. The cool killings hid the ones the film could not legally show. The ending about witness protection hid 32 more years of arrests, lies, bigamy, and self-destruction. Today we are going to walk through 10 parts of Henry Hill's real story that Goodfellas either changed, softened, or left out entirely. Section 1. The Brownsville Kid Who Watched Gangsters from His Window. The movie Goodfellas opens with young Henry staring out a window at the wise guys across the street, then running errands for them in a sharp little jacket. Voiceover. As far back as he could remember, he always wanted to be a gangster. It is one of the most famous openings in film history. It is also a very clean version of what actually happened. Henry Hill Jr. was born on June 11, 1943, in Manhattan. He was the son of an Irish-American electrician named Henry Hill Sr. and a Sicilian immigrant named Carmela Costa. His father had come to America at age 12 after his own father passed away, and he brought with him an old country belief that a man worked hard, kept his head down, and did not ask questions. The family was poor. Henry grew up in Brownsville, a rough working-class pocket of Brooklyn, sharing a small apartment with 7 siblings. He was not a smart kid in the way schools measure smart. He was dyslexic, though nobody used that word for him back then. Teachers wrote him off as lazy. His report cards were disasters. By the time he was 10, he already understood that the world of books and classrooms had no room for a boy like him. Across the street, another world did. There was a cab stand run by a man named Paul Vario, a heavy-set, thick-necked capo regime in the Lucchese crime family. Around that cab stand stood a rotating cast of men in expensive suits, men who drove gleaming Cadillacs and Lincolns, who wore gold watches and heavy rings, who double-parked wherever they wanted and never got a ticket. To a dyslexic kid from a cramped apartment, these men looked like kings. The movie captures this part accurately. What it softens is why Henry wanted out of his own home so badly in the first place. In 1955, when he was 11 years old, Henry walked across that street and into Paul Vario's cab stand looking for a part-time after-school job. That was the moment his real life began. He started small. He parked cars. He ran sandwiches and drinks to card games. He fetched coffee for men whose names would one day be spoken in federal courtrooms. Within a year, at 13, he was serving drinks at a poker game when he met a big, smiling Irish-American hijacker named Jimmy Burke. Burke was tipping the kid 20s like they were nothing. Henry later said Burke was sawbucking him to death. 20 here, 20 there, more money in one night than his father earned in a week. While this was happening, Henry was lying to his parents every single morning. He told them he was going to school. He had not been in months. The truancy letters kept arriving at the Hill apartment. One day his father opened one. What happened next was the part the movie does not show in full. Henry Sr. beat his son so badly that when Henry turned up at the cab stand the next day, the men there asked what had happened to his face. In the book Wise Guy by Nicholas Pileggi, the source that Martin Scorsese adapted, Henry describes what the wise guys did next. They did not go to his father. They went to the mailman. A group of grown mafiosi grabbed the postman, put him in a car, drove him to the local pizzeria, and told him from that day forward, every letter from Henry's school went to the pizzeria, not the Hill house. The mailman understood. The letters stopped coming. The beatings stopped with them. Think about what that meant to an 11-year-old. The men in the suits did something his own father could not do. They protected him. They fixed his problem. They made the pain go away. Of course he loved them. Of course he wanted to be one of them. The movie frames his admiration as a boy's fascination with glamour. The truth is that these men became his replacement family because his actual family home had become a place he wanted to escape. There is one more detail that rarely makes it into the story. The famous Goodfellas line, the one everyone quotes, the one about always wanting to be a gangster, was something the real Henry Hill said looking back as an adult. But in later interviews, he admitted the real truth of his childhood was more complicated. He once said he actually wanted to be a priest, and that it just did not work out. A Catholic kid from a Sicilian mother, raised to go to Mass, quietly thinking about a collar and a church, and ending up in a cab stand run by a capo regime instead. That contradiction, a boy who could have gone two completely different ways, is nowhere in the film. By the time Henry was in his early teens, he was running full errands for various front businesses, which included the cab stand, a pizzeria, and a shoe shine stand. He was also getting into his first real crime. His introduction to arson came when a rival cab stand, Rebel Cab Company, opened around the corner. Paul Vario's brother Tuddy drove Henry there after midnight with a metal drum of gasoline in the back seat. Henry smashed the cab windows, stuffed in gasoline-soaked newspapers, and threw in lit matchbooks. The whole lot went up. He was not yet old enough to drive. He had just started the 8th grade. His first arrest came at 16 in 1959, when he and Paul Vario's son Lenny tried to buy snow tires using a stolen credit card. The police grabbed him. They interrogated him hard. Henry gave them his name and nothing else. Not a single answer about who he worked for, what he did, or where the card had come from. He kept his mouth shut, went home on bail arranged by Vario's lawyer, and got a suspended sentence. That silence earned him something priceless in his new world. Paul Vario and Jimmy Burke both noticed. This kid, this Irish Sicilian half-breed who could never be a made man because his blood was not pure Italian, had passed the one test that mattered most to them. He did not talk. That was the real beginning of Henry Hill. Not a romantic awakening to a glamorous life, but a dyslexic, beaten kid who found men who valued his silence more than his father ever valued his report card. But before Henry could become the gangster the movie made famous, there was another man he needed to meet in earnest. A man who smiled and tipped like royalty. A man who would go on to be the most dangerous human being Henry Hill ever stood next to. Section 2. The real Jimmy Burke was not Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro's Jimmy Conway is one of the coolest characters in film history. He is charming. He tips everyone. He protects Henry like a big brother. And when he turns dangerous near the end, it is a slow burn. The real James Burke, the man De Niro was playing, was not a slow burn. He was a weapon that the people around him tried very hard not to set off. Jimmy Burke was born James Conway on July 5, 1931, in New York. His mother, Jane Conway, was an Irish immigrant from Dublin. He never knew who his father was. His mother could not care for him, and when he was 2 years old, New York Social Services placed him in a foster home. From that day on, his childhood was a blur of orphanages and different families. A large portion of his early years was spent in a Roman Catholic orphanage run by nuns. Some of the foster families he lived with were kind. Others were very cruel. He was beaten badly by people who were supposed to be raising him. He was also harmed in ways a child should never be harmed. When he was 13 years old, in 1944, he was in the back seat of a car with his foster parents. His foster father turned around to hit him in the back seat and lost control of the wheel. The car crashed. The foster father died at the scene. The widow survived, and from that day on, she blamed young James for the accident. She beat him until he was moved out of that home too. By the time he was out of his teens, he had been handed from dozens of foster parents to dozens more, and he had learned the lesson that shaped his entire adult life. You did not trust anyone. You did not rely on anyone. If someone could hurt you, you hurt them first. Eventually, a family named Burke took him in. They were, for the first time, kind to him. He loved them. He took their name and kept it for the rest of his life. He visited that foster family even after he became a dangerous man, and when he started making real money from crime, he would drop unmarked envelopes of cash on their doorstep. One of the few tender things anyone ever recorded about Jimmy Burke was the way he treated those people. It did not extend to anyone else. At 18, in 1949, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for passing counterfeit checks for a Colombo family associate named Remo Cersani. The police offered young Burke a deal: give up Remo, walk away. Burke refused. He did the time, and when he came out, Cersani made sure he was protected inside prison. That refusal to talk became Burke's calling card. He was Irish, which meant he could never be a made man in the Italian mafia, but he could be something else. He could be the guy they all trusted. The guy who hijacked trucks and tipped the drivers $100 so they would not look at his face. That is where the nickname Jimmy the Gent came from. He was famous for being polite to the people he was robbing, but a nickname is not a personality. By the 1950s, he was running his own crew under Paul Vario, based out of his bar in Queens called Robert's Lounge, and his real reputation was the one that people only spoke about in whispers. Henry Hill, who knew Burke for more than 20 years, later estimated that Jimmy Burke was personally responsible for somewhere between 60 and 70 deaths. Some of those were people who crossed him. Some were people who knew too much. Some were people who were just in the wrong place. Hill told the FBI that there were more than a dozen bodies buried in and around Robert's Lounge over the years. The bar that the crew drank in was also a cemetery. In 2013, long after Burke was dead, the FBI and the NYPD dug up possible human remains at his old property. The wedding story is the one that tells you the most about the man. In 1962, Burke was engaged to a woman named Mickey. Shortly before the wedding, he found out that her ex-boyfriend had been bothering her. The ex was calling her, shouting at her on the sidewalk, driving past her house. A normal groom might have confronted the guy. Burke handled it his way. On the morning of the wedding, police in New York found the ex-boyfriend inside his own car. He had been killed and cut into more than a dozen pieces. There was no investigation that led anywhere. Jimmy Burke went and got married that same day. Stories like that one were the rule, not the exception. Burke paid off a stranger's debt once when an old woman told him her son owed $5,000 to a loan shark. He paid the loan himself. Then he had the son killed. He was polite, he was generous, he smiled at everyone, and he would turn in a second. Henry Hill said you could be sitting next to him laughing, and in the same breath he would decide you were a problem, and you would be dead within a week. There is one more thing about Jimmy Burke that the movie hides in plain sight. In Goodfellas, every major character is given a real name except 3. Paul Vario became Paulie Cicero. Tommy DeSimone became Tommy DeVito. James Burke became Jimmy Conway. The reason Burke's name was changed was a business decision. His daughter Catherine demanded a payment of $100,000 for the use of the Burke family name in the film. The producers refused, so Robert De Niro played a man named Jimmy Conway, and most people watching the movie still do not know they were watching a real killer whose daughter wanted a cut. In the end, Jimmy Burke was convicted in 1982 for fixing college basketball games, and later handed a further 20-year-to-life sentence for the murder of a man named Richard Eaton. He died of lung cancer on April 13, 1996, at the Roswell Park Cancer Institute in Buffalo, New York. He was 64 years old. He would have been eligible for parole in 2004. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But before the prison and the cancer and the trial, Burke needed a partner, a loose cannon, a kid with a temper and no off switch, a kid that even Burke would eventually lose control of. Section 3. Tommy DeSimone was not a short hothead from Brooklyn. Joe Pesci won an Academy Award for playing Tommy DeVito in Goodfellas. He deserved it. His version of Tommy is small, loud, dangerous, and funny. He is the guy who lights up every scene he walks into. He is also almost nothing like the real Tommy DeSimone in the parts that matter most. The first thing you need to know is how big the real Tommy was. Joe Pesci is 5 feet 4 inches tall. Tommy DeSimone, according to multiple sources, including Henry Hill himself, stood 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed somewhere between 210 and 225 pounds. He was a large, burly enforcer. When Hill described him to Nicholas Pileggi for the book Wise Guy, he was describing a big man with a mean streak, not a small man with a short fuse. Hill later told interviewers that Pesci's performance was 90 to 99% accurate, with 2 exceptions. One was his size, the other was his age. This is the second thing the film gets wrong. In Goodfellas, Henry and Tommy grow up together. They are introduced as the same age. They run around the neighborhood as kids together. They come up together. They take the Air France job together as young men, and their bond is the core friendship of the story. That is not what happened. Tommy DeSimone was around 7 years younger than Henry Hill. Henry was already in his early 20s and a trusted associate in Paul Vario's crew when he first met Tommy, who was 15 or so. By that point, Henry had already done his army service, already burned down a rival cab company, already been arrested once, and already made a name for himself by keeping his mouth shut. Tommy was a kid. Henry was effectively his older brother in the life. When you watch Goodfellas, what you are actually seeing is a version of events where Henry mentored Tommy into becoming a killer. The film just chooses not to show that imbalance, because it is more fun to watch 2 peers than to watch a grown man teaching a teenager how to hijack a truck. Tommy came from serious mafia blood. He was born on June 6, 1946, into a family soaked in organized crime. His paternal grandfather, Rosario DeSimone, had been a boss of the Los Angeles crime family in the 1920s. His uncle, Frank DeSimone, took over the same Los Angeles family in 1956. 2 of Tommy's brothers were associates of the Gambino crime family in New York. One of those brothers, Anthony, was killed in 1979 by a mobster named Thomas Agro. His sister Phyllis was the longtime mistress of Jimmy Burke from the age of 16. This was not a kid who drifted into the life. He was born inside it. What Pesci nailed was the temper. The real Tommy had no off switch at all. Henry Hill called him a pure psychopath. Hill said Tommy would throw darts at other players at the bar if he was losing at a card game called Pinochle. He was almost always high on cocaine, which made him even more unpredictable. Hill told Pileggi that Tommy sometimes killed people just to test out a new firearm. Hill and Jimmy Burke could never agree on the real number of people Tommy had personally ended. Hill believed the count was somewhere around 11, including roughly 4 he killed during prison stints. Burke thought it was higher. Nobody really knew. He was also the character in the Goodfellas story with the most film-accurate signature moment, the violent death of William Bentvena, known on the street as Billy Bats. That happened on June 11, 1970, at The Suite, a club Henry Hill owned in Queens. Bats was a made man in the Gambino crime family. Tommy was not made. Tommy could never be made because under a long-standing internal mafia rule, killing a made man without permission from the top was an automatic death sentence. Tommy did it anyway. He did it over a single comment Bats had made at a welcome home party, asking Tommy if he still shined shoes. That comment cost Bats his life, and it started a clock ticking on Tommy's own life that would run out almost 9 years later. Tommy DeSimone disappeared on January 14, 1979. His wife Angela reported him missing. His body has never been found. But the story of how he actually died and who pulled the trigger is nothing like the version the movie tells. The real reason Tommy DeSimone was killed has almost nothing to do with Billy Bats and everything to do with a secret that Henry Hill kept hidden for decades. Section 4. The Billy Bats hit was real, but the full story is worse. The Billy Bats scene is one of the most famous in Goodfellas. The welcome home party, the insult about the shine box, Tommy snapping, Jimmy holding Bats back while Tommy beats him, the drive upstate, the sounds from the trunk, and the stop at Tommy's mother's house for a shovel. Most people who have seen the film remember that sequence as one of the most shocking in the whole movie. What those people do not know is that almost every beat of that scene is taken from real life, and the pieces the film chose to leave out make the whole thing even harder to sit with. The man on the receiving end was William Bentvena. He was born in New York, most likely in Brooklyn, and he had been a made soldier in the Gambino crime family since around 1961. He worked under a capo named Carmine Fatico, and he was a close personal friend of a young, rising gangster in the same crew named John Gotti. Bentvena was not some tough guy everyone hated. Inside the Gambino family, he was respected. He had done his time quietly. In 1962, he had been convicted in a heroin case alongside another famous mobster named Carmine Galante, and he had been sent to federal prison in Danbury, Connecticut for 15 years. He served about 8 of them and was released in early June of 1970. Within days of getting out, Bentvena wanted his old rackets back, his loan shark business in particular. The problem was that while he had been away, Jimmy Burke had taken over that loan shark operation and had no intention of handing it back. That is the detail Goodfellas hides. The film frames the whole thing as a temper tantrum by Tommy over a joke about shining shoes. The real reason Burke and Tommy were already circling Bentvena was money. Bentvena wanted his business back. Burke did not want to give it up. And the insult at the party was not the cause of the violence. It was the excuse for violence that was going to happen anyway. The welcome home party itself was held in late May 1970 at Robert's Lounge in South Ozone Park, Queens. This was the bar Burke owned and used as the office for his entire crew. At some point during the night, Bentvena, now 37 years old, looked at Tommy DeSimone and made a joke. He asked Tommy if he still shined shoes. Tommy had genuinely shined shoes as a young kid trying to earn tips from the neighborhood wise guys. He had spent years trying to leave that part of his past behind. He leaned over to Henry Hill and Jimmy Burke and told them flat out that he was going to kill Bentvena. Henry knew instantly that Tommy meant it. 2 weeks later, on June 11, 1970, Bentvena walked into the Suite, the nightclub that Henry Hill owned in Jamaica, Queens. The club was nearly empty. That was not an accident. Burke made small talk with him at the bar. About 20 minutes later, Tommy came in carrying a revolver and a plastic mattress cover, which tells you the plan was in place before Bentvena ever walked through the door. Tommy attacked him. Burke helped. Hill helped. By the time they were done, Bentvena was unconscious on the floor, and they believed he was dead. The 3 of them wrapped him up, put him in the trunk of Henry's car, and started driving. They stopped, as the movie shows, at Tommy's mother's house for a shovel. What happened next was a very long drive to a dog kennel in upstate New York, owned by a friend of Jimmy Burke, where they intended to bury the body. During that drive, they realized Bentvina was not actually dead. Tommy and Jimmy handled the rest of it on the side of the road. Bentvina was buried there at the kennel that night. That should have been the end of it. It was not. About 3 months later, Burke got word that his friend who owned the dog kennel was selling the land to a real estate developer who was going to dig up the property. The body could not stay there. Burke told Hill and Tommy to go back, dig up what was left of Bentvina after 3 months in the ground, and move him. Hill did it. According to the book Wise Guy, the remains were eventually destroyed in a car crusher at a New Jersey junkyard. In the film commentary Hill recorded years later, he gave a slightly different version, saying the body was hidden in the basement of Robert's lounge first, before ending up in the crusher. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The worst part of this story is not the killing of Bentvina. It is what the killing set in motion. Because in that single night, Burke, Hill, and Tommy DeSimone had crossed a line that the Mafia takes more seriously than almost any other. They had ended the life of a made man without permission from anyone above them. They had just started a clock that the Gambino family would eventually let run all the way out. Section 5. The Lufthansa heist. Made headlines, but the real story was the bodies that followed. The Lufthansa heist is the centerpiece of Goodfellas. The film shows it as the job that changed everything. After the heist, the crew is flush. Tommy gets a fur coat for his mother, one of the guys buys a pink Cadillac, and Jimmy starts killing everyone. All of that is true. What the film does not have time to show is just how big the real robbery was, how close it came to being the perfect crime, and how many people died in the months after because of one parking ticket. The robbery happened at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York on Monday, December 11, 1978. 6 men in ski masks and gloves arrived at Lufthansa Cargo Building 261 in a black Ford Econoline van at roughly 3 in the morning. They cut the padlock on the gate with bolt cutters and walked in. They herded the night shift employees into the break room and handcuffed them. They forced the shift supervisor to open the double-door vault without triggering the alarm, something the crew already knew how to do because they had a man on the inside feeding them information. 64 minutes later, they were gone. No shots were fired. Nobody on the Lufthansa staff was seriously hurt. What they took was bigger than they were expecting. They had planned the job around an estimated haul of around $2 million. Instead, they walked out with $5 million in unmarked American cash and another $875,000 in jewels. The cash came from foreign exchange transactions made by American tourists and American servicemen stationed in West Germany. Lufthansa flew it back into New York once a month, and it was supposed to be picked up the same day by armored Brinks trucks and taken straight to the banks. On this weekend, a shipment arrived Friday, December 9th, and the inside man, Lufthansa cargo worker Louis Werner, made sure it stayed in the vault until Monday morning. That 2-day window was the whole plan. The total haul was just under $6 million in 1978. Adjusted for inflation, it was worth well over $20 million today. It was the largest cash robbery in the history of the United States at that time. None of the cash has ever been recovered. None of the jewelry has ever been recovered. The mastermind was Jimmy Burke. The idea first came from Peter Grunwald, another Lufthansa worker, who passed it to Werner, who took the idea to his bookie, Martin Krugman, to pay off a $20,000 gambling debt. Krugman brought it to Henry Hill. Hill brought it to Burke. Burke put together the crew. Tommy DeSimone was one of the 6 masked men on the ground that night. Angelo Sepe, Louis Cafora, Joe Manry, Paolo Licastri and Robert McMahon were the others. Burke's own son, Frank Burke, drove one of the backup vehicles. A gopher named Parnell Edwards, known on the street as Stax, had one job and one job only: take the van after the robbery and have it destroyed in a mob-controlled junkyard. Stax did not do it. He got high, drove the van to his girlfriend's apartment in Brooklyn, and parked it illegally in front of a fire hydrant. 2 days later, on December 13th, a patrol officer called it in as an abandoned vehicle. Police impounded it. Inside, they lifted fingerprints and found a footprint. Within days, the FBI had names. The Burke crew was on their radar. Burke did not wait to see what the investigators would do next. He made a decision instead. Rather than pay everyone their agreed cut of $400,000 to $500,000 each, he would make sure there were no witnesses left to talk. According to Henry Hill, who said it on a History Channel interview years later, Burke decided it was cheaper to make people disappear than to pay them their share. Stax Edwards was the first. He was killed 7 days after the heist on December 18, 1978, in his own apartment. Tommy DeSimone and Angelo Sepe did the job. Over the next 6 to 7 months, a long line of people connected to the robbery began to die or vanish. Martin Krugman, the bookie who brought the tip, disappeared on January 6, 1979. Richard Eaton, a small-time criminal who tried to skim from the laundered cash, was found frozen inside a refrigerated truck. Joe Manry and Robert McMahon were shot and killed in a car in May 1979. Paolo Licastri's body was found on a burning trash pile in Brooklyn. Louis Cafora and his wife Joanna vanished without a trace. A woman named Teresa Ferrara, connected to the crew, was found in pieces in New Jersey. By the summer of 1979, at least 9 people who had been in on the heist, laundered money from it, or simply been close to someone who had, were dead or gone. The only person ever convicted for the robbery itself was Louis Werner, who got 15 years. But Burke's cleanup had one problem. The killings were not only about the heist. One of them was about Tommy DeSimone, and the real reason Tommy was killed had almost nothing to do with Lufthansa. Section 6. The real reason Tommy was killed had almost nothing to do with Billy Batts. Near the end of Goodfellas, Tommy is told he is finally going to be made. He puts on his best suit. He walks into an empty house. He realizes nobody is there to meet him, and he knows what is about to happen. One shot, and he is gone. Jimmy smashes a phone booth. Henry hears the news from a payphone. The film gives you a clean story. Tommy died because of Billy Batts. 9 years earlier, he had killed a made man from another family, and the debt finally came due. That part is half true. But the real reason Tommy DeSimone was set up and killed in January 1979 is a story that Henry Hill kept quiet about for more than a decade. It only came out in his 1994 memoir, a book called Gangsters and Goodfellas, and later in interviews he did in the 2000s. The full story involves a betrayal by Tommy against one of his closest friends, a secret affair inside the crew, and a phone call that was made not because anyone wanted justice for Billy Batts, but because a man wanted revenge for something much more personal. To understand what happened, you need the timeline. In 1972, Henry Hill and Jimmy Burke were arrested in Tampa, Florida for working over a gambler who owed a debt. They were both convicted in 1974 and sentenced to 10 years each in federal prison. That left Henry's wife Karen back home in New York without her husband, and it left Paul Vario in charge of looking out for the family. What Vario actually did, according to Henry Hill himself writing years later, was start an affair with Karen. Henry only found out about this long after the fact. The crew knew. Jimmy Burke knew. Tommy DeSimone knew too. And during that same stretch, Tommy made a decision that would end his life. While Henry was still locked up, Tommy went after Karen. He beat her, and he tried to do something to her that was not wanted. Karen fought him off. Henry wrote about the incident in Gangsters and Goodfellas, and was careful not to give many details, but he made clear what had happened. Paul Vario found out fast because Karen was sleeping with him, and Vario was the one with the power to do something about it. Here is where everyone's motives line up in a way the movie never shows. Tommy had already put his name on a list 9 years earlier by killing Billy Bentvina without permission. The Gambino family had wanted him dead for years. They could not touch him without the Lucchese family giving them the green light, because Tommy was Paul Vario's guy. That green light is the one thing the Gambinos had been waiting for. Vario made the phone call. The story ran through the senior men on both sides, and a quiet deal was made. The Gambinos could have Tommy. He was no longer protected. The Billy Bats file, closed for almost a decade, was suddenly open again. But the file only opened because of what Tommy had done to Karen, and because Vario was angry enough to hand him over. This is why Tommy did not see it coming. He thought he was being called in for the highest honor in his life. In late December 1978, or very early January 1979, Tommy was told he was going to be made. For a half-Italian gangster who had been chasing that moment for 15 years, there was nothing bigger. He had actually been lining up a legit path to it, even though killing a made man should have locked him out forever. He put on a sharp suit. Henry Hill later remembered the exact outfit: a double-breasted Bill Blass suit in black, a starched blue shirt, and a beige silk tie. Tommy kissed his mother goodbye and got in a car. Paul Vario's own son, Peter Vario, along with a Lucchese associate named Bruno Facciolo, was part of the ride. The date, according to most records, was January 14, 1979. Tommy was driven to a location, and he never came out. His body has never been found. His wife, Angela, reported him missing the same week. There are multiple versions of who actually pulled the trigger. Henry Hill later told Howard Stern and wrote in The Lufthansa Heist, his 2015 book with journalist Daniel Simone, that John Gotti himself did it, and that Gotti made the death slow because Bats had been his personal friend. Other mafia sources, including informant Joe Dogs Iannuzzi, say a Gambino enforcer named Thomas Agro did it. There is also a theory that Jimmy Burke himself was involved, clearing up a loose end from the Lufthansa job. Nobody will ever know for sure. What is certain is this: Tommy DeSimone did not die because of what he did to Billy Bats. He died because of what he did to Karen Hill. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. And the man whose wife was in the middle of all of this, still sitting in a federal prison cell during most of it, was about to come home to a life that was already falling apart faster than he knew. Section 7. The Boston College Basketball Scandal. Goodfellas left on the cutting room floor. Goodfellas mentions college basketball in passing. You hear about it briefly near the end, when Henry starts talking about all the rackets he was running at once. What the film never explains is that in real life, Henry Hill was at the center of one of the biggest sports betting scandals in American history. It is the crime that eventually sent Jimmy Burke to prison, and it is almost completely missing from the movie. The story starts in a federal prison. In 1972, Henry Hill and Jimmy Burke were arrested in Tampa, Florida, and in 1974, they were sent to the United States Penitentiary at Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. While Henry was inside, he became friends with a man from Pittsburgh named Paul Mazzei. Mazzei was a gambler and a drug dealer. The two of them talked endlessly about schemes they could run together on the outside. Henry got out on parole on July 12, 1978. Within weeks, Mazzei was setting up meetings that would change both of their lives. Mazzei was friends with two brothers from Pittsburgh, Rocco and Anthony Perla. The Perla brothers were small-time gamblers who had spotted an opportunity. Rocco had a childhood friend named Rick Kuhn, a 6'5" forward on the Boston College Eagles basketball team. Kuhn was entering his senior year in the 1978 to 1979 season. The Perlas pitched a simple plan. If they could get Kuhn to shave points, meaning help decide by how much his team won or lost, they could make a fortune with the right bookmakers. They did not need Kuhn to throw games, they just needed him to control the margin. The problem was, the Perlas did not have enough money or enough connections to place the kind of bets that would make this worthwhile. That is why they brought it to Mazzei, and Mazzei brought it to Henry Hill. Henry brought it straight to Jimmy Burke and Paul Vario. With the Lucchese crew backing the money and providing the bookmakers, the plan suddenly had real power behind it. On November 16, 1978, Henry Hill flew to Boston for a meeting with the players. They sat down at the Boston Logan Airport Hilton. Rick Kuhn had already brought in his teammate Jim Sweeney, a junior guard. Hill told the players exactly what he expected. He would pay each of them $2,500 per game they helped fix. The players pulled out a schedule. Sweeney took a small schedule card, circled the games he thought they could manipulate, and handed it to Hill. Hill later told Sports Illustrated that the players were businessmen. They knew exactly what they were being asked to do. The first test run was on December 6, 1978, against Providence College. Boston College was favored to win by 6 or 7 points. The plan was for Kuhn and Sweeney to make sure the Eagles won by less than that. Instead, Boston College blew Providence out by 19 points. Hill and the Perlas lost thousands of dollars on the first try. Burke was furious. Afterward, the team got better at their end of the deal. Kuhn approached Ernie Cobb, the team's leading scorer, and according to Hill, Cobb came on board too, though Cobb was later acquitted in court and his involvement was never proven. Over the next 3 months, the crew shaved points in a total of 9 games. Of those 9, 4 made them money, 3 lost money, and 2 broke even. The final game in the scheme was the Boston College versus Holy Cross rivalry on February 10, 1979. Boston College lost by only 2 points when the plan had required them to lose by more than 3. Burke lost about $50,000 on that one game, and he was done. The operation ended. Nobody in law enforcement knew any of this was happening. College basketball was not even on the FBI's radar. The scandal only came out because on April 27, 1980, Henry Hill was arrested in New York on drug charges. During his interrogation, federal prosecutor Edward McDonald asked him why he had been flying to Boston so many times in late 1978 and early 1979. Henry told him. The prosecutor had no idea what he was about to uncover. When the trial finally happened in the fall of 1981, a federal grand jury in Brooklyn had indicted Jimmy Burke, Paul Mazzei, Rocco Perla, Anthony Perla, and Rick Kuhn. The trial lasted 4 weeks. Henry Hill was the star witness. Jimmy Burke was sentenced to 12 years. Rick Kuhn got 10 years, later reduced to 28 months. Mazzei and Tony Perla got 10 years each. Rocco Perla got 4 years. Cobb was acquitted. Sweeney was never charged. All 3 players were later permanently banned from the NBA. This was the first major domino to fall in Jimmy Burke's life. But the man who knocked it over, Henry Hill himself, had just started talking. And what he told the government about his own life over the next few months would bring down an entire crew. Section 8. Karen Hill was not the wife the movie showed you. In Goodfellas, Karen Hill is played by Lorraine Bracco, and she is the emotional center of the film. She starts out as a nice Jewish girl from Long Island who gets swept up in a dangerous world she does not understand. She slowly learns what her husband really does. She goes on one ride-along with him for a drug run. She flushes the substances down the toilet when the FBI kicks in the door, and she ends up in witness protection by his side. The film paints her as a woman who was dragged into the life. The real Karen Friedman Hill was nothing like that. Karen was born in New York City on January 16, 1946. Her family was Jewish, which right away makes the real story different from the one Scorsese told. She grew up on Long Island in the Five Towns area. She had two sisters named Adrienne and Sandy. Her parents had raised her to expect a normal suburban life. She trained as a dental hygienist, and when she first met Henry in 1965, she was working at a New York dental office. The meeting itself happened the way the movie shows it, but the man at her table was not Tommy. Karen's friend had been set up with Paul Vario's son, Paul Vario Jr. Henry was the second wheel on a double date arranged by the elder Paul Vario to keep his son company at a place called Villa Capra. Karen thought the first date was awful. Henry stood her up on the second one. She called him anyway, they went out again, and within 4 months she was eloping with him to North Carolina to get married, because North Carolina had looser rules for couples who wanted to marry fast. Her Jewish parents were not thrilled. At the start of the marriage, Karen really did believe Henry's lies. He told her he was a bricklayer and a low-level union official. Within a year or two, she knew the truth. What the movie softens is how fast she stopped caring. Her own daughter, Gina, later wrote in the family memoir, On the Run, A Mafia Childhood, that Karen once described the attraction out loud. One day, she was a dental assistant from a middle-class family on Long Island. The next day, she was sipping champagne that Sammy Davis Jr. had sent to their table at the Copa. She loved it. She did not want to give it up. Karen and Henry had 2 children, a son named Greg, born first, and a daughter named Gina. In the movie, the Hills have 2 daughters. The son was cut out entirely. The most commonly given reason is that Greg did not want his real story told on screen. He later changed his mind and co-wrote the family memoir with his sister. The film quietly pretends he never existed. What the movie also avoids is what the home actually looked like. According to Greg and Gina's book, Henry and Karen threw parties at their house where adults openly used cocaine in front of them. They have said that sometimes party guests even offered cocaine to the children. Gina had a Miss Piggy mirror that was used by grown men and women to do lines off of. This was not a rare thing. It was a normal Saturday night in the Hill household by the late 1970s. Then, in November 1972, Henry was arrested in Tampa, Florida. In 1974, he was sentenced to 10 years at the federal penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. He served 4. While he was gone, Karen found that the crew she thought was family had no interest in looking after her. She later said in Wise Guy that she had read about how gangsters take care of each other when one of them is inside, but she had never seen it in her own life. If they did not have to help you, they did not. 2 things happened during that prison stretch that the film scrubs clean. The first is that Paul Vario started an affair with her. The second is the incident with Tommy DeSimone that was covered in the earlier section. Both of those things were kept secret from Henry for years. By the time the family entered witness protection in 1980, Karen was carrying weight Henry did not know about. She is still alive today, living under an alias somewhere in the United States. She and Henry separated in 1989, and the divorce finally came through in 2002. She has spent the last 4 decades deliberately staying out of the public eye. Her children's book is the closest thing to her real voice that exists. Greg and Gina grew up, got out, and built quiet lives of their own. They have said clearly that the home they grew up in was nothing like what the movie showed. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. But for Henry Hill himself, the lies did not stop at home. The charming party boy Ray Liotta put on screen hid a man who was running on substances from the very beginning, and the habit almost killed him, long before his heart finally did. Section 9. The real Henry Hill was never the charming party boy from the movie. Ray Liotta's Henry Hill is the reason Goodfellas works. He is warm, he is funny, he has that easy smile, and when he spirals at the end of the film, it hits hard, because you have spent 2 hours liking him. The movie frames his problem as a late career unraveling. Everything was fine, and then in the last year and a half of his life in the mob, the substances took over, and everything collapsed. That is not what happened. The real Henry Hill was running on chemicals from the early 1970s onward, and the charming party boy on screen hid a man that the people around him described very differently. One writer who had met real mobsters in passing during his childhood in New Jersey, Stephen Schlein, summed it up bluntly after Ray Liotta died. He said the real Henry Hill was neither charming, nor good-looking, nor intelligent, and that he was a lifelong user. That is one opinion, but it lines up with what Henry's own children said. Greg and Gina Hill wrote a book together in 2004 called On the Run: A Mafia Childhood. In it, they described a father who was almost never sober, who brought a steady stream of people into their house to use substances with him, and who got worse every year instead of better. Gina once described a physical incident with her father so frightening that she seriously thought about running away from home. She said she only stayed because she did not want to leave her mother behind. This was not a problem that started in 1979 or 1980. Henry first came home from prison on July 12, 1978, after serving about 4 years of a 10-year federal sentence for extortion. While he was inside Lewisburg, he had made a key contact named Paul Matzey, who taught him how to smuggle and move large quantities of substances. Within weeks of getting out, Henry was using those connections to build an entire pipeline. He was moving cocaine, heroin, marijuana, and quaaludes on a wholesale level, shipping product from Brooklyn down to Pittsburgh and back. He was making enormous amounts of money very fast. He was also using what he was selling every single day. There was one problem. The Lucchese crime family had a strict rule that no member or associate was allowed to deal in narcotics. The rule existed because the federal penalties were so heavy that anyone caught would almost certainly flip to save themselves. Paul Vario had made it clear to Henry that if he got caught dealing, he was on his own. Henry ignored him. Jimmy Burke eventually got involved too. So did Tommy DeSimone before he was killed. The whole operation was happening behind the backs of the senior men in the family, which meant Henry was risking his own life every day he kept it running. The end came on April 27, 1980. A kid who had been working as a courier for Henry was picked up by narcotics detectives Daniel Mann and William Broder in Nassau County. The detectives got him to talk. He told them everything he knew about Henry's operation. When they came for Henry, they did not come with a small search warrant. They came with hours of surveillance tape and a stack of charges that could have put him away for decades. During his time in the lockup, he was worn down, jumpy from withdrawal, and pushed to the edge. He kept yelling at the officers to leave him alone, and he refused to speak to the federal prosecutor assigned to his case, a man named Edward McDonald. 2 things changed his mind. The first was a wiretap the FBI played for him. On the tape, 2 of his old associates, Angelo Sepe and Anthony Stabile, were talking to Jimmy Burke. They were telling Burke that Henry was no good anymore and that he was a junkie. Burke told them not to worry about it. The second was a surveillance recording of Burke talking directly to Paul Vario. On that one, Burke said out loud that Henry needed to be killed. That was the sentence Henry needed to hear. The 2 men he had trusted most in the world had just agreed that he was not going to make it to his next birthday. There is one more story that federal sources have since confirmed. Shortly after Hill's arrest, A junior mob associate named Greg Bucciaroni later alleged that Jimmy Burke offered him money to lure Henry to a Brooklyn grocery store, where Burke could have Henry taken care of. Bucciaroni refused to play a part in it. If he had said yes, Henry Hill would never have lived to testify. Instead, on May 27, 1980, Henry signed a cooperation agreement with the United States Department of Justice Organized Crime Strike Force. He walked out of jail not as an inmate, but as a federal witness. And once he started talking, he did not stop. His testimony across multiple trials over the next few years brought down 50 convictions. Paul Vario was convicted of helping Henry get a no-show union job to qualify for early parole, and later hit with a 10-year sentence for extorting air freight companies at JFK Airport. He died in federal prison on November 22, 1988, of respiratory failure. He was 73. Jimmy Burke got 12 years for the Boston College point-shaving case in 1982. While he was already serving that, he was convicted of the murder of a man named Richard Eaton and given another 20 years to life. Burke died of lung cancer in a Buffalo, New York prison hospital on April 13, 1996. He was 64 years old, and he would not have been eligible for parole for another 8 years. 50 convictions, 2 crime bosses dead behind bars, an entire crew dismantled. All of it came out of one man's mouth, because one man finally understood that the family he had joined at age 11 had decided he was expendable. But the movie ends with Henry walking up to a suburban house to collect his morning paper, complaining that he is now an average nobody. What actually happened to him over the next 32 years is a story the film never shows, and it is almost impossible to believe. Section 10. What happened after Goodfellas ended? The movie ends on one of the most famous closing shots in film history. Henry is standing in a bathrobe on a suburban driveway. He walks out to pick up his morning newspaper. In voiceover, he tells you that he is now an average nobody, that he has to wait for the garbage truck like anyone else, and that the hardest part is eating the same bland food as everyone else. A title card comes up. It tells you that Henry and Karen separated in 1989, that Henry was arrested on drug charges in Seattle in 1987, but was given probation and has since been clean, and that he and Karen are both still in the witness protection program. The movie leaves you with the impression of a man who has paid a price, but who has at least survived. Almost every single detail of that ending was wrong. What actually happened to Henry Hill over the 32 years between the movie ending and his death is a slower, uglier, stranger story than Scorsese had room to tell. When Henry entered witness protection in 1980, he went in under the name Martin Lewis. The family was moved around constantly because Henry kept blowing his cover. According to his children's book, On the Run, they lived in Omaha, Nebraska, then Independence, Kentucky, then Redmond, Washington, then Seattle, and eventually Sarasota, Florida. Every time the federal marshals relocated them, the cause was the same. Henry could not stop telling people who he was. He would get a few drinks in him at a neighborhood cookout, or he would get cornered at a bar, and out would come the stories about the mafia and his old life in New York. In the fall of 1981, still inside witness protection and still using the name Martin Lewis, Henry met a woman in the Pacific Northwest named Sherry Anders. He did not tell her he was already married. Within a short time, he had married her too, in Virginia City, Nevada. He was now legally a bigamist. He had one wife in hiding with their 2 children in whatever town the marshals had moved them to, and another wife who had no idea the man she had married was a federal witness using a fake name. Sherry did not find out who he actually was until his arrest in 1987, when news helicopters started flying over the house. The Seattle arrest was the end of witness protection for Henry. In 1987, he was living in the Wedgwood neighborhood of Seattle under another new name, Alex Canclini. and he was convicted in a federal court there for cocaine trafficking. That conviction was the last straw. He had been arrested at least 6 times during witness protection for burglary and substance-related offenses, and the marshals had finally had enough. He was kicked out of the program. His own wife, Karen, filed for divorce in 1990. The divorce was not finalized until 2002, 12 years later. After he was out of the program, Henry did something none of the marshals could have predicted. He leaned into his own fame. Goodfellas came out in 1990, and instead of hiding, Henry did interviews. He appeared on The Howard Stern Show. He went on 60 Minutes with Charlie Rose. He did a photo shoot with Ray Liotta for Entertainment Weekly in 2006, and it was at that shoot that Liotta convinced him to check himself into a rehab facility for his alcohol problem. Henry went in 2 days later. The sobriety did not last. He wrote 4 more books, or co-wrote them. In 2002, he put out The Wise Guy Cookbook, a collection of recipes from his life in the mob. In 2003 came A Goodfellas Guide to New York. In 2004, he published his memoir, Gangsters and Goodfellas, with a writer named Gus Russo. His final book, The Lufthansa Heist, co-written with journalist Daniel Simone, came out in August 2015, 3 years after his death. He also opened restaurants. He worked for a time as a chef at an Italian restaurant in North Platte, Nebraska. He sold his spaghetti sauce online under the name Sunday Gravy. In October 2007, he opened an Italian restaurant in West Haven, Connecticut, called Wise Guys. The restaurant closed the following month after a fire. He was selling coffee mugs, aprons, and mob memorabilia on his website right up until he died. The arrests kept coming. In August 2004, he was arrested in North Platte, Nebraska at the regional airport after leaving his luggage behind. Inside the bag was drug paraphernalia. On September 26, 2005, he was sentenced to 180 days in jail for attempted methamphetamine possession. On March 26, 2009, he pleaded guilty to 2 misdemeanor counts of public intoxication and was given 2 years of probation. Later that same year, while still on probation, he was arrested again for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. He told interviewers he blamed the incidents on his alcohol problem. By the end of his life, Henry was living in Topanga Canyon, California, near Malibu, with his partner of 6 years, a woman named Lisa Caserta. He had been engaged to her at the time of his death. He had a complicated relationship with his children, Greg and Gina, who had spent years estranged from him because of the harm he had done to their mother and to their childhood. They were in contact with him again by the end, though the wounds never fully healed. Henry Hill died on June 12, 2012, at a hospital in Los Angeles. It was 1 day after his 69th birthday. The official cause was complications from heart disease following a heart attack he had suffered shortly before. His long-time smoking habit had destroyed his heart over decades. Lisa Caserta spoke to CBS News afterward. She said he had been sick for a long time and that his heart had simply given out. She added that he had gone peacefully and that, for a good fella, it was a better ending than most of them ever got. She was right. Paul Vario died in a federal prison cell in 1988. Jimmy Burke died of lung cancer inside a prison hospital in 1996. Tommy DeSimone vanished in 1979 and was never found. Henry was the only one of them who got to die in a proper hospital bed, surrounded by people who loved him, with a paid manager, a website, and a woman holding his hand. Goodfellas ended in 1980, with Henry saying he was just an average nobody now. He spent the next 32 years proving that was the biggest lie the movie ever told. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.